Great, right. Hopefully you've all got a Unity Hub, which is basically the kind of central manage for starting up your projects and things in Unity. So what we're going to do is from here, you can, it's useful to see that there's all the tutorials on there. You can install different versions of Unity. So we're going to use Unity 2020. The first thing you need to do, back up to projects, click new up here, and we'll use 2020. Just give it a name. Choose 3D for now. I don't think we need anything else. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. And then click create. And what that'll do is it'll start building some things. So while that's loading up, I'm going to just drop back into Rhino. So I assume you're all still using Rhino to do your 3D stuff. So a couple of key things to remember when you're building anything to go into Unity is to make sure that you've got your units right. So the first thing we'll do, new file, don't save. And I tend to use small objects meters. I assume large objects meters will probably work as well. And then just click open. So another thing you need to make sure is that, well, obviously everything you're building in here is to scale. I assume it probably is anyway. And also that you're building from the origin. So sometimes if you import like a 3D file from somewhere else, or you've got like a city model, it'll be over here somewhere for some reason because it's brought from somewhere else. The best thing to do is to drag it right across back to the origin, but also in the kind of Z-axis as well. So just as a demonstration, what I'll do is create just a little box. We'll make it just a single unit like that. And then we're also going to apply just a quick material, and I'll show you how that works later. So let's just call that brick. Give it a quick color. Drag that on. And then just so you can get an idea of kind of how things are positioned in the world, let's just drop the sphere on there as well. And then we'll give that another material. There we go. So what you need to do is basically select both of those. You want to export, so file, export selected. And the first thing to do is make sure you pick the right file type. So the best one at the moment that I know of is FBX, and it comes under Motion Builder. So it's motionbuilder.fbx. Just click on the options, make sure that comes up. Choose meshes only. Materials doesn't really matter. And make sure you untick the export lights and export views. You can turn, basically if those are on, then it'll bring in any lights in your scene and any cameras as well. But it gets a bit messy. Make sure that's unticked, everything else should be okay. Just save that. Generally, it's best to start with fewer polygons unless you have any issues and it's kind of coming up looking a bit weird. And then just click OK. So what you'll find as well is that you'll have massive models if you're bringing in city models and things like that. So it's also best to break it up and just select individual items or a small group of items and export them one at a time. So hopefully our, let's see, let's open that one. So your new scene should have loaded by now in Unity. And a couple of things just on the user interface. I mean, most of it should be self-explanatory if you've used 3D stuff before. The first one is that you've got over on the top left-hand side is the hierarchy. And that's basically everything in your scene. You can group things into smaller groups and things like that. You start off with a main camera, which you can move around, directional light, which you can move around as well. In the middle, you've got your kind of working screen. So move around in there just using WASD. And right click rotates the view. middle mouse button to drag around, and then zoom in as well. On the right-hand side, so if we select the main camera, you'll see this is the inspector, and this basically gives you properties and things of whatever you've got selected, a bit similar to Rhino, really. And then at the bottom, you've got this project window, and that's basically all of the files that are in your project directory. So at the moment, we've already got a scenes folder, which has the current scene. Another thing on here at the top is you've got a couple of different ways of moving around. So you've got like the move tool, the hand tool to drag the screen, a couple of snaps there as well. And at the top of the middle is quite an important button, that's the play button. So if you just click on that, it'll drag you straight across to this game tab, and that's basically the main camera view at the moment. You can pause, or one quite useful thing is that you can, while you're in play mode, you can still go back to the scene, select things and move them around, go back to the game mode and see how that changes. So the first thing we'll do is just create a couple of folders in here. So right click in the assets tab there, go to create folder. We'll just call that objects. Another one called code, materials. I think that should do for now. So to bring in that test object that we've created, I'd recommend doing this at least until you get used to things for pretty much every project, is just export a single unit block, and that just lets you know that you've got all your all your settings set up correctly, basically. So we'll just drag in this box test here, and you want to drag that into the objects folder. You'll see that straight in there. So to sort of add that to our scene, what we can do is you can either drag that into your hierarchy, and that'll let you drop it into a folder, or just drag it straight into the window here. So as we discussed in Rhino, we've set everything up to be at the origin. And what that means is that if we drag something in, the first thing you want to do is set the position to 0, 0, 0 in the inspector. You can see that whenever you select an object, it'll give you just some information on the position, rotation, and scale. Because of how the FBX exports from Rhino, it'll automatically set this to -90. So you should just leave that, really. And it sets the scale to 1.
Ask a quick question, please.
Yeah, sure.
How did you get your box test geometry to get it up onto your screen into the window? Did you add it to the hierarchy first? Yeah.
You can do either. So you can either drag it into the hierarchy, or you can drag it just straight into the scene. So I've just dragged it straight across there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And it's important to set this to 0, because if you then export something else, you can essentially build your entire world in Rhino and export each individual component. And as long as you set the position to 0, everything will line up inside of Unity. Right, so the next thing we'll do is look at the materials on this. So if you click the little drop down here, what happens is that when it exports from Rhino, it keeps all the objects as separate entities, but groups them up under one, what's called a, I've got the name of it. Well, it's basically a group of objects, basically. But you can select each of these individual meshes, and that'll show you individual settings for each of those. So you could actually then just tweak that a little bit if you wanted to, or adjust the scale of it. But what we want to do now is add some materials. So if we go back to our main folder, go to the materials folder, right click, create, and then material is in there somewhere. There we go, material. Let's just call this brick. When you have things selected in the asset browser, it also comes up in the inspector up here. And just a quick one, actually. One thing is with the inspector, what you might find happens sometimes is you want to see the details on this brick material, but you also want to move things around in the scene. And what you'll see is that keeps switching between. So one useful little tool is there's a little lock button right at the top right-hand corner there. If you click that, that'll lock the current selection and let you kind of play around with other things there. So if you select the brick material that's in there, it's got a few settings. What we'll do is we'll select, you can get different shaders, which allow like shiny effects and things like that, but we'll just stick with the standard for now. And that's got a few settings on here. So albedo just sets the base color. So you can see the little preview window here that's changing. So let's just set that to, let's go for orange, so you can see the difference. Give it a bit of metallicness, shininess, that kind of thing. You can also add in a texture in here. So if you click on this little dot here, you could select a texture and that'll be applied. And you can apply that to other things. So if you get into more advanced stuff, you'll be using things like normal maps, occlusion maps, that kind of thing. So then to apply that to our object, there's two ways you can do it. You can either go into the object in the hierarchy, and you'll see that it's got a property here that's got the mesh vendor. Inside materials, you'll see that that's got the material on there. And the problem is that if we do it like this, it'll basically overwrite the link between this and Rhino. So the best way to do it is to actually go back to our object that we've imported in here in the asset browser, click on the object, and that'll show you the materials that can be mapped. So we can look, we've got the brick material there and the glass material there. So if we just click this little dot on the right hand side, that'll show all the materials in the project. So we'll select the brick that we've done, double click, and that'll drop that in there. Glass, let's just add in that weird one there, and then just click apply. And that means that if you basically do any updates to this object externally and bring it back in, it'll automatically link everything up. So another thing I'll just quickly show is that if we then go back into Rhino and make any changes, so we could add another box in there. Give that the brick material. You then select these, file, export selected like we did before. I think we use box. And if you just overwrite that FBX again and hit yes, same settings, okay. And go back into Unity. In theory, that should update. It might be an issue with how it's linked to my machine. If it doesn't update, you can just drag it back in. I'll have to send you a link on how you get that to update, because that's very nice. It might update in yours, it might be how I've got it set up on here. So another thing that you might want in your scene is a floor, basically. So as well as importing objects like that, you can also go into your hierarchy, right click somewhere and add 3D objects. So we've got plenty of things in there. But also you can add what's called an empty, and that's basically just a group. So if we just create something in there that's called landscape. And if you create an empty, it's best to set it to 0, 0, 0, which will just make things easier. And then you can right click on this, this empty that you've created, go to 3D object, go to plane, make sure that's set to 0, 0, 0. And then just set the scale to something massive. You also want to set just a different material on there because just that in here. Something you'll find with the materials in here is it's best not to have full white or full saturated, otherwise it messes with the lighting. So you might also want to have a group that is your buildings as well. And then we're also going to create an empty that is the lighting. And if you just drag that directional light into there, and then you can basically rotate that around, set your shadows where you want them to be. So yeah, to rotate, there's a couple of shortcuts that I'll be using. So E, W is to move. If you click W while you've got some selected, it'll put the move tool. E rotates, and R scales. We won't do anything with this one. So you'll notice that in Unity, it's default set up with a skybox that's dynamic. So if we rotate the sun down to the evening, you can see the sky just too much. So there's a few settings that you might want to just adjust on there as well. If you want it to be, if you select the light, you'll get a few little settings in there. So you could adjust the brightness, that kind of thing, and the intensity. Give it a base color that's a bit weird, that kind of thing. Quite useful if you're making some sort of stormy weather or something like that. The other things in there. I think that's probably out for now. But you can also add, if you right click on lighting, you can add a single point light. So light, point lights. So that's because our lines it. And same again, you can give that a few different color settings and things like that. With the basic version of Unity, you've only got a few lights, I think, that you can have as casting shadows. So if you have any issues with loads of lights, it's not doing any shadows, that'll be probably be by. What else? So another part of setting up your environment and your lighting is the, let's see, I think it's the project settings. Sorry, so if you go to quality, what you'll find later is that if you've got quite a big scene, there's a point where you zoom out and the shadows will actually disappear, which can be an issue if you're working on kind of a city scale object. So you need to go to edit, then project settings, and then just go into this quality tab here. There's a few other settings, but if you want to go down to shadow distance and just whack that up to something a bit bigger. So let's put. If you just click on play, you get to see a quick preview of that. So at the moment, we can't really do anything in our game. Can't move around, can't move the camera, that kind of thing.